Hello everyone, I'm Arali and welcome back to another theory video. So if you're new to the channel, I have been making a lot of theory videos and things like that for End of Dragons, and I had one in particular about the deep sea dragon where I went kind of crazy about what the deep sea dragon could be and so on and so forth, but some of the stuff actually does have some merit and I kind of wanted to make another video like that, but maybe base it more on the minions and things like that. But before I get into that, I want to talk about a little bit more about the deep sea dragon. So based on the logo for End of Dragons, we've seen there's two dragons on the logo and no one really knew what that meant, and I kind of had a little bit of the theory of, ooh, maybe it's one dragon and they're just two parts of a dragon. Now recently, with the live stream that they had recently, they released two pictures of what looks to be the deep sea dragon. Now one is above what I think is the Harvest Temple, and then another one is in the deep sea. Now this is really interesting because that kind of is exactly how the logo looks, because the logo, even on the logo, both dragons have a little bit of a different design, and those pictures kind of look like almost opposing, where like one is above the water like floating around the temple and it's a little bit brighter, and then there's one that's swimming underneath in the ocean and it's a little bit darker. So maybe they're hinting at something where these two dragons make up the whole and they're kind of like two parts to the dragon, kind of like a yin and yang thing, good and evil, two sides of one coin. We have seen this concept before in Guild Wars, where Lissa, the goddess of illusion, actually is made up of two sisters, Lys and Ilia, and she's always depicted as this dual-faced goddess, and it would be really interesting to have that for the deep sea dragon as well, where maybe there's two parts to this dragon and they maybe are opposing each other, where maybe they cancel each other out or they're their own weakness, so that's how you would maybe defeat that dragon or something like that. It would be close to how Kralkatorrik is, but it's different because there's actually two different bodies that would be opposing each other, and it could be like a paradox where it's like they can't exist without each other kind of thing, so you can't really destroy the one without destroying the other kind of thing, and maybe that plays into the story later. Not sure, but that was something I observed. I wanted to see what people think, so let me know what you think about that part. But then I kind of want to talk about the minions. So based on what we have seen, we don't know the name of the deep sea dragon and we don't know its minions, but I have a couple of theories as to, I have a champion theory, something that could be used as a champion. I have some minions that could possibly be used, and then I also have a herald that could possibly be used, which I think might surprise some of the people that know some of the Guild Wars lore. Let's kind of go into it. So I want to start out with the champion. There is a creature in Guild Wars 1 called Zuhanuku, which is this kraken, and you have to defeat this kraken in order to get the Spear of Archimors. That part of the story doesn't really matter in the context of what we're talking about, but what's important is the actual creature Zuhanuku, because the Luxans who are holding this tournament, they do this every year to determine who the champion is. Now they always defeat Zuhanuku because Zuhanuku appears every year it comes back. So that's really interesting because that's a theme we kind of have seen in Guild Wars 2 already. We have seen this with the dragon champions. The Shatterer, Clove, Jormag, those things return all the time. And it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that maybe that's a champion that's created by the deep sea dragon and it comes back every year. So that would be really interesting to see that maybe as a champion. It would also kind of merit with the minions of the deep sea dragon are described, because they're described as being tentacled horrors that live in the deep sea, and Zuhanuku fits that description perfectly. So it would be really interesting to see that come back as an actual champion, or maybe they could have it have some kind of spirit of the past tell about Zuhanuku, or even have Zuhanuku actually be in the game, because it does return every year, and it's not too far-fetched to think that, hey, even after 250 years it still keeps on returning and coming back and you still have to defeat it. You know, this could be part of a meta event, this could be part of an explanation as to what this creature really is. So that was my first part. That kind of covers what a champion maybe could be of the deep sea dragon. Then another thing that I want to talk about is the Leviathans. Now the Leviathans is a super confusing subject, and I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible, and I'm going to use as many pictures as I can in the video, because because this is kind of where it gets a little bit crazy in the Guild Wars lore. Specifically, when you look on the wiki, there's a lot of like discrepancy as to what is called a Leviathan or whatever. So for the people who have only looked at Guild Wars 2 and that have kind of knowledge of Guild Wars 2 will know that Leviathans are these deep sea fish, right? And we do see them at the end of the manifesto trailer. There's a really big one that swims by the player character or some kind of Sylvari character, and we do see in the actual overworld, we do see some skeletons all around the ocean. We see some deep sea fish skeletons that are Leviathans, and the one that we see in the manifesto trailer is actually way bigger than the skeletons that we ever see. But there's also in the guild hall, there's a decoration called the ribcage of a primordial Leviathan, indicating that there's larger versions of the ones that we have seen, the skeletons that we have seen, meaning that these Leviathans have a primordial version maybe that is like a lot bigger, and that's a scary thought in itself. But it's very interesting because we have never seen them in game. There's a couple models, there's a blue one and a brown one that was made, but it was never used in game, which is kind of a shame, I think, but kind of gives us the opportunity here as we're fighting the deep sea dragon to maybe bring these back into the game in some shape or form. But those are the Leviathans in Guild Wars 2. Now, when we talk about Leviathans in Guild Wars 1, it gets a little bit more confusing because there's one creature called the Leviathan, which is a worm type of creature found in the deep. Now, I'll talk about the deep a little bit later on, but this worm is a Leviathan, and it's not the only one of its species. There's other ones, and they're also called Leviathans. And this is very interesting pertaining to Guild Wars 2 because we have in the solid ocean fractal, we have a creature called the Jade Maw, which is identified as a kraken. It's obviously doesn't look anything like a kraken, and Zuhanuku is also identified as a kraken, so there's kind of weird discrepancy there already, but it seems to be based off of what the Leviathan, the worm in Guild Wars 1 looked like. The only difference there is that it now has a giant eye, but it kind of is the same kind of thing because it's in the Jade Sea. We know the solid ocean fractal is part of the Jade Sea. This is what Dessa says. So it's really interesting to see that the Jade Maw is based off of a Leviathan worm from Guild Wars 1. So this could potentially be another minion of the deep sea dragon because we see like Mordremoth, for example, has the Spitfires, which are almost worm-like themselves, and they're stationary, and you have the vine tenders that like protect them and stuff. But the Leviathans, the worm Leviathans, could kind of serve that same purpose of maybe being kind of like the Spitfires. So that was interesting. But there's also a species called Leviathans, which are, again, this is super confusing, but these are these crab-like creatures. At some point on the wiki were identified as crustaceans, and there's actually 6 variants, 3 different models. There's the Leviathan claw, the Leviathan mouth, the Leviathan eye, the Leviathan arm, the Leviathan head, and the Leviathan mind. Now, the reason why this is really interesting is because the naming convention here is really close to what dragon minions were named, because there is a Leviathan claw, mouth, and eye, and we have seen those. We have seen eyes of Zaitan, we have seen claws of Jormag. We have seen those. So it's very interesting. Of course, these weren't made to be dragon minions when factions originally came out, but ArenaNet could go back and use those as minions of the deep sea dragon. They're not necessarily tentacled horrors, but they do kind of, in a weird way, when you look at some of the models, they kind of represent like Cthulhu, which that's what I always think of when I hear tentacled horrors, is like Cthulhu, and I'll get into that a little bit later on as well when I talk about something else. But that's kind of what I think of when I hear like tentacled horrors. I think of like what Cthulhu is always depicted as looking like and stuff, and they kind of have the like eyes like it, they kind of look like that. So I could see this being some type of minion of the deep sea dragon in some shape or form, and that kind of would cover different, you know, you have the big fish, they would be the swimming Leviathans, and then you have the worms, which are these like stationary big things that you maybe see blocking the road or something if you're doing an event or something, and then you have the Leviathans, the species, the little crustaceans that could be like actual minions. So kind of covering all the different things. Now I want to talk about one part of the dragon minion theory that maybe is a little far-fetched, but it's a little bit interesting, I think, and that's talking about a herald. Now we haven't really seen heralds. We saw one herald, it was the herald of Balthazar. Now Balthazar isn't a dragon, but we have seen heralds, and in the wiki wiki, Scarlet Briar is actually identified as a herald of Morgemoth. So it's not unheard of that dragons have heralds. Now, what makes a herald is that they're a little bit more intelligent. They have like kind of a will of their own in a way, where they kind of have like their own mind. They're not just like mindless minions, but they have their own like intelligence, and they can like do kind of their own strategies and stuff like that. And they actually have like, a lot of dragon minions don't have speech, but they can actually like speak and stuff like that. So it's really interesting because I think I have someone that could fill that role, and that's Canaxai. So earlier I was talking about the Deep. Now the Deep was a mission in Guild Wars 1 that you would take on with 11 of your friends. It was an elite mission, and in this mission you would venture deep into the Jade Sea, where Luxon miners were corrupted by a demon named Canaxai. Now, we don't know where Canaxai came from. We only know that he's a demon, but I think that maybe he could be a demon that was corrupted by the Deep Sea Dragon, because again, this kind of gives merit to the Deep Sea Dragon being way underneath the Jade Sea, because the Deep is the closest part to the bottom of the Jade Sea where the Deep Sea Dragon would be, and that's kind of where maybe the Herald would be, you know, sending his army out, because Canaxai has been in that mission. You hear that he's been corrupting these miners, and the Luxons call them the outcasts. Now, there is another type of creature in the world of Guild Wars 1 called the Oni. You can find them anywhere on Cantha, and they just kind of appear out of nowhere, and they're these like assassin type of things. But there is some people that in Guild Wars 1 talk about how Oni are an advanced state of corrupted outcasts. And this is really interesting because we see this kind of with like Svanir, how like the sons of Svanir turn into Icebrood in certain instances and stuff like that. And we have seen it recently with the Char, where the Char were converting into Frost Legion and they were becoming these like Icebrood creatures. And it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that Canaxai, under the influence of the Deep Sea Dragon, is corrupting these people into being the outcasts, but then also if they get too much corruption, they turn into Oni. And the reason why I find the Oni so interesting is because when you look at their design, they have these like tentacles over their mouth, and they kind of look like a little Cthulhu-esque. And again, it kind of gives merit to the whole like tentacle horde thing, where this is all we know of the Deep Sea Dragon. So it kind of gives merit to that, where I could see Canaxai having been this herald of the Deep Sea Dragon. Of course, we defeated, but with the powers of the mist kind of being out there because Krakatoric died, and everyone has kind of been like getting these powers of these portals where they can portal people around. We've seen this with Jormag, where Jormag can just portal its army around everywhere. It wouldn't be too hard to think that maybe Canaxai died and went to the mist, and now the Deep Sea Dragon called Canaxai back into the real world, and we actually encounter Canaxai in the deep again or something like that, where it's the herald and it kind of does the bidding of the Deep Sea Dragon. Now, this might be a little far-fetched of a theory, but if you look at all the different things, this could very well be how the minions of the Deep Sea Dragon look. And so that was kind of my theory. I wanted to come up with something for a champion, for little minions, for stationary enemies, and then even a herald. So there's a possibility that we will see all those things coming back at some point. Let me know what you guys think about this. I've been kind of working on this for a while, and I think, like I said, once I started doing research, it kind of came together a lot better than I thought it would. So I'm very interested to see what everyone thinks. And yeah, that's going to be it from me for today. Let me know what you guys think. If you haven't subscribed, I would really appreciate it. Leave a like, leave a comment, or even a dislike if you don't like it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.